Hi, my name is Irena Swanson and today I want to show you a very efficient method for making rows and columns of squares on point. In this quilt top, the basic units are rectangles, and in this top the basic units are parallelograms, either slanted this way or that way. And in this top there is a gap between adjacent rows so that vertices here don't meet on point, and that prevents bulk here as opposed to in this quilt. So we will be making these basic units, so parallelograms of two different slants or rectangles. Okay. I make each row with exactly 2 strips of fabric cut from selvage to selvage. My finished size here is 4.5 inches, so the strip for the squares was cut at 5 inches across. And because 5 inches goes into width of fabric 8 times, each of my rows, columns has exactly 8 squares in it. The strips for the corner triangles have to be cut wider. And the minimum extra that you have to add is double seam allowance times square root of 2, so that's at least 7/8 of an inch. But to accommodate for any wobbles in seam allowance, cutting and pressing, you should probably add more than 7/8 of an inch. In addition, if you want to have any gap like this between points, then you should take that gap, multiply by square root of 2, and add that in addition to the strip width for these corners. Okay. Yes, my edges here are on bias. I'm not afraid of bias. With traditional method, one of these columns would take 23 seams, so that's a lot of handling of these bias edges and a lot of opportunity for stretching the bias. But I will show you how to make these with 6 seams total. Okay. So however you make these, then if you cut between 2 of these points here, and then sew the bottom part to the top, then you get exactly one of these rectangles, but there's not enough seam allowance here on the top, which may or may not bother you. If you have extra fabric lying around, then you can get that extra seam allowance. So let me show you how this one was made. This was originally, let's hide this, was a parallelogram of that form. And then I trimmed this off up here, and I had extra fabric, and from this extra fabric I made a triangle over here. If you don't have extra fabric lying around for the corners, then in order to make just from a much wider strip, so if this were much wider, then when we made the horizontal cut, this cut-off triangle would be quite a bit wider, and then if it's bigger, it would be sufficient to go here. So in order to achieve sufficiently big corner triangles, the strip widths for this would have to be made 1 3/4 of an inch wider than the strip width for this. So it's up to you how you want to finish these. I cut all of these, so these were cut with 5 inches selvage to selvage, and these at 6 3/4 of an inch. But whatever your cutting width for squares is, then add at least double seam allowance times square root of 2 plus any gap times square root of 2, or else add 1 3/4 of an inch plus possibly extra to add more here. Okay. So the basic unit is we create these. Once we have these, then these follow, and we can make further triangles and rows out of them. Alright, so as I said, we'll start with strips 5 inches wide, 6 3/4 of an inch wide, or whatever your size is. One of these fabrics was not cut from selvage to selvage, it was leftovers from something else. Okay. So you know that I use tubes, but this is too narrow to make tubes. So what we do first is cut this length in half and double the width. So you want to have this half here, each of the halves, you want it to be at least 20 inches. So it's okay if we use a little bit of a selvage inside future seam allowance, but don't use too much of a seam allowance. So in any case, you cut this in half, make sure this is at least 20 inches. All right, so here are the two parts cut in half, and then we want to sew them together. Now, don't sew the tops of quilts because I don't want to be using this selvage in my seam. So that's a little bit of a selvage is okay, but I won't necessarily match these. And again, when I sew this here, I want to make sure that what is usable in between is at least 20 inches. Okay. So here is the original thing that was at least 40 inches long, cut in half lengthwise and sewn into double width. All right, so sewn into double width. How many inches? This is 2 seams so far. This is still on the narrow side for tube work. So we will again cut in half lengthwise and sew the two sides together. But now this time you want to make sure that the usable part in the two halves is at least 10 inches. All right, so cut. And so when we cut, we get these two halves and usable parts are at least 10 inches in each. And then of course we want to sew these together. Okay. And again, where we sew for, watch out for seam allowances. The top part here is not usable, but some of it is okay. Again, you want 10 inches, usable 10 inches. All right, so here is one seam already made. And now we could press this, and then now this is wide enough for making a tube. So we want to sew the other edge together too. Now be careful, don't sew these together like that. No twisting, we do not want twisting. So possibly make a perpendicular cut here, and when you make a perpendicular cut, then sew here, and you will get a tube. All right. So here is one such tube. And once you have a tube, then I take my iron, I press it here on the sides, and then I can slide the iron underneath and push the seam allowance to the other side, and I similarly do it in the other corner. I could turn this inside out, but that's okay, I don't have to. So now we have a primary wide tube made with only 4 seams, and now we want to cut this into 2 narrow tubes of width 5 inches for our 4.5 inch finished squares. So this is what I did here. There's a little bit of waste here, and there's a little more waste because my this strip didn't come from selvage to selvage, it was left over from something else. And now I turn these inside out. So I have 2 primary narrow tubes, and now these 2 get sewn together. Now there are 2 ways of sewing them together. So the darks are the squares. We could sew the squares in this diagonal, or we could square them to form the diagonal going the other way. I'll show you. So here we have diagonals on squares going this way and diagonals going the other way. By the way, these are making the parallelograms in columns 1, 3, and 5, and these are making the other parallelograms. The idea now is to cut at 45 degrees through this swath here. So these will be the edges of the parallelograms here, of the rows. So you don't want to cut through both layers of the tube here because, well, that would ruin the whole process. So you want to slide a cutting mat underneath, or if you don't have that, possibly first mark with a pencil and then cut with scissors one layer of the tube only. Okay, so that's what I did here. So blue goes with blue, purple goes with purple. So again, it may not seem like that this length is making that. However, this here will turn like that, so the diagonals will go that way, just like so. The edge, this edge here, is that slant over here. All right. So now what do we do? So here the same thing. So this is for column 1, this is for column 2. And now the very simple thing to do is you cut through all of these swaths and you get 4 parts here. And then you can sew this edge to that edge, this edge to that edge, and that edge down there. And that will give you one of these parallelograms. But for the rest of this, for most of the rest of this show, I will show you actually how to do it with 1 extra seam rather than 3 extra seams, and this is what I call bias tape method. You may want to watch my video. There is a link at the bottom on how to make bias tape and multi-tape very efficiently and why you may want to do that. So rather than cutting through all of these, I just slit. So I mean cut to within 1 inch or ½ an inch from the edges. But the top one, I do extend one of the slits all the way, and I do it where the angle is acute here rather than there. And then in the kitty corner down there, I also cut all the way. So now I'll turn this. So this here is now free floating there. And down here we have a 3 long edge, and up here we have a 3 long edge. And all we do is do a little bit of twisting, and you sew these together. Okay? And so once you sew these together, only 1 seam. This is seam number 6. Here is that seam number 6 already made, and that was a seam between 3 parts there. So there are 2 in between 3 things. And I could press this latest seam, but I'll just finger press it, and I will extend the slits from the 2 sides into full cuts. So here is 1 in between the 3 things, and here's the second in between the 3 things. And what we get is one of these parallelograms. And then of course you want to press the latest seams, and then you can manipulate it either adding these extended triangles or chopping down the middle and then sew the bottom to the top to get rows like this but without any seam allowance here at the edges. Or you could manipulate it with extra cutting here and sewing the extra triangle here to get rows with intact points here. I hope you enjoyed this episode on making squares on point. Thank you.